Hello, good morning, and welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. Eddie Burgess is my name. Some of you may be familiar with me. I'm somewhat a little bit apprehensive and nervous today. I'm filling the hot seat in hosting this morning's webinar. It's a first for me, and I hope all goes smoothly. But anyway, moving along, I'm filling big shoes from Pat Murphy, who has moved on to a different stage in his career. This morning, I have with me Lori-Rae van Laren, who has recently finished her PhD. She did a Walsh Fellowship in the University of Galway in conjunction with Teagasc. Her supervisor, Dr. Mary Ryan, is also joining us. And I have Eoghan O'Brien, who will be helping with the questions afterwards. Eoghan is an ACP advisor in the southeast of the country. Those of you that don't know me, I'm working in Teagasc's Agricultural Catchments Programme, and we know an awful lot about the biophysical aspects of water quality, about nutrients and things like that. But a key part of catchment science is the social practice change part of it. And we have research. Michelle McCormick is working with the ACP in that aspect. But this morning's talk is talking and focusing on that side of catchment science rather than on the biophysical aspects. Lori-Rae is from South Africa, and she's a social scientist, and she has been looking at the different systems that have been put in place for practice change. And one aspect was looking at water quality. She had a significant bit of experience working in Uganda, systems in Uganda as well. Lori, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Eddie. And I have to say I'm a little bit nervous as well. This is my first time presenting at Signpost, but I'm very happy to be here. Yeah, I think that introduction was fairly complete. I have to say that the Irish context is relatively new to me. I started my PhD 4 years ago, and that's kind of when I was introduced really to how farming and farming systems work here. Previously, my work was mostly in East Africa and mostly with international development organizations and NGOs often. So a very different world, but also surprising similarities. And the water quality work that we've done has been a really kind of interesting piece to look at the challenges that farmers face here and abroad, and how some of these bigger challenges are linked together. So I suppose without further ado, I'll get stuck into it.
Thanks very much. I'll turn off my camera and mic here when I'll let you present away. Thanks very much, Lori. Yeah. I'll hand over to you.
Great. I hope you can all see the presentation, but quite a mouthful of a topic this morning. Improving rural water quality, looking at the role of both local actors and environmental factors in what we call mission-oriented agricultural innovation systems. And a big part of the presentation this morning will be really breaking down some of those words and what they mean in academics, but also in policy, and I suppose in real life as well. This piece of research is part of the Watermark project. Dr. Mary Ryan is here this morning, and she's spearheaded that along with other colleagues from both Teagasc and other universities as well. This is just one piece of research under the Watermark project, but overall, Watermark was looking at research on water quality really from a multidisciplinary approach and using what we call a systems approach to thinking about water and improving water in Ireland. It's really two kind of focus areas, this idea of knowledge exchange, so co-designing and tailoring measures for water quality, and also what we call assessing the innovation system, which is what I'll be talking about today. And one of the key questions from Watermark overall was really, well, what are some of the barriers, behavioral, but also kind of broader, and that prevent farmers and other actors from embracing pro-environmental water quality behaviors or behaviors that improve water quality. So what we mean by systems and systems thinking, I think this is a really broad term. There's lots of different examples of what a system is, but they kind of all have these base elements which are the same. So when we talk about a system, we're talking about elements that are connected and interact with one another within a specific boundary. So you can think about things like the solar system or the respiratory system, really range in scale, but they have these kind of common features. And what we also know is it's not just elements that are interacting with one another, but the system impacts how they behave, and also when elements or actors leave the system is changed. And what we also see that when we're looking at a system versus, let's just say, a collection of stuff, we're looking at a kind of overall function or a behavior. So it's turning inputs into outputs. And so when we talk about systems thinking, what we're really talking about is a set of skills that we try and use to really identify and map and understand different systems, try and predict some of their behavior, and try and design modifications or changes that can help change that overall function or produce certain desired effects within and as a result of the system in place. So one system which you may be increasingly becoming familiar with is this idea of food systems, or the food system. It's something that's really cropping up kind of increasingly in policy and legislation, and I would say even in kind of everyday discussion. But this is what we mean when we talk about the food system or a food system. It's really going beyond just the activities that are involved in agriculture or food production. So, producing, processing, packaging, and retailing food items, to thinking about both the broader drivers of food systems and the outcomes. So one of the kind of basic outcomes that we're often hoping a food system will achieve is something like food security. That's usually kind of the underlying outcome that we're trying to get from our food systems. And so we design certain activities to achieve that outcome. But of course, there are other outcomes as well. And we'll talk about water quality as one of those. So it's not just the activities and the outcomes, but also recognizing that our kind of past and present food systems have an impact on future food systems. It's what we would call kind of feedback loops, that how we design a system today has an impact on the system tomorrow. And that's especially in terms of environmental feedbacks. So if we're focused only on production, we may have negative environmental consequences. Or if we're only focused on kind of the production of very cheap food, we might have kind of socioeconomic feedbacks for farmers and other actors within the system. And so we're also thinking about the drivers, kind of what might determine if these activities are possible or how they're done. And so we can think about drivers again, both in terms of kind of environmental drivers like water availability or soil health or biodiversity, and socioeconomic drivers as well. So what are some of the kind of political, economic, social contexts that food production is taking place within? So really kind of trying to expand our thinking around agriculture and what's involved, and what the impacts of our decisions are. So within that, and from the title of today, we're focused on something called innovation systems. Again, the kind of basic elements of a system over there, and innovation systems are very closely linked to food systems. I suppose the kind of key definition of innovation is really novel technology and knowledge that's put into widespread economic use. One of the kind of historical examples that we have is this idea of high yielding seed varieties. So that's a specific kind of new technology that's introduced, as well as the knowledge of how to use these seeds or how to plant them. And then that's put into widespread use. So I suppose the difference between an invention and an innovation is an invention maybe is still kind of sitting on the top shelf and in the garage and is not really being put out into practice, but innovation is when we really start to use new technology and knowledge in a wide scale way. And just to say as well that when we say novel technology or knowledge, that can often be new to a context. So it may have existed beforehand, but when we introduce it into a new sector or a new country, it can kind of count as innovation. So innovation isn't only related to agriculture, although there's kind of a broad body of research that's developed over time looking specifically at innovation within agriculture. And so when we talk about the innovation system, we're really talking about the network of actors who develop, but also help spread or diffuse innovation along with the institutions. So that could be policy, regulation, but also some of these softer institutions around social norms and values and beliefs that shape the interaction between these actors and the performance of the innovation itself. And I suppose innovation systems really tries to kind of recognize that a wide range of actors can be involved in the development and diffusion of innovation. It's not just scientific research bodies or even just the public sector that's involved. We recognize that it's private sector, farmers play a huge role in this, and civil society, for example, international development organizations or other NGOs in different contexts. And also just to say that when we talk about an innovation system, we're not necessarily looking for a perfect example. We're really looking for trying to understand some of the barriers of why innovations aren't taken up at scale. Just to say that in the past, innovation in agriculture was chiefly concerned with really improving productivity, so improving yields. But over time, we've kind of transitioned more towards thinking about innovation for more sustainable food systems. So really reevaluating some of the outcomes that we expect and want from a food system. But of course, the challenge with this is that sustainability challenges are often what we call kind of wicked problems. They're complex, they're contested often, and they also tend to have wicked solutions, which again, there's not one clear solution. We're often looking for kind of bundles or multiple solutions at once to solve some of the big sustainability challenges we have. And water quality is a really good example of this. It's a really complex sustainability challenge, and it requires kind of a concerted effort across scales to try and tackle this challenge. So this is where we get this idea of mission-oriented innovation, which is basically as we've shifted away from just being concerned about innovation for economic growth or productivity, we're now concerned also with innovation for social and environmental challenges. There's lots of different types of missions, again, within and without agriculture, but essentially we're trying to design solutions to solve some of these big challenges. And because of the complex nature of this, because of the kind of urgency and the social and environmental element of it, we often see that there's a key role for states or governments to play. And this is usually in designing mission-oriented policies or regulations that try and tackle a big, grand challenge in a specific way across disciplines, and hopefully hoping for outcomes with large impact, but also tend to be within a defined time frame as well. So again, just to bring this all together is that if we're looking to achieve a kind of new outcome within the food system, so if we're looking for improved water quality as one of the outcomes, we may need to apply new knowledge and technology, so innovation into how we kind of design our activities. But we also need a shift in norms and practices, and that hopefully that as we change this, we will have positive feedbacks on the environment for future food systems. So this idea of mission-oriented innovation or missions is not just a research term, it's not just an academic term. It's really starting to feature more heavily in especially European policy. So this is from the Horizon project. They identified 5 mission areas. You can see not all of them are related to food, but some of them are. And I suppose interestingly, kind of on the radar was water as well, as part of one of the 5 kind of big missions that the European Commission was looking to tackle. And it's also showing up in Irish kind of strategies and policies as well. So this is the Food Vision 2030. It's broken up into this mission language again. It's kind of 4 missions related to food and agriculture. So we can see it's kind of spreading in a way in terms of being used in strategies and policy. I just wanted to pull this quote out of the Food Vision specifically because I think it really shows kind of how in line the language is with the academic language. So this idea of mission-oriented policy, which is responding to grand challenges and moving away from narrow sector-based approaches to more systems-based transformation. And again, interestingly, water shows up as one of the goals within kind of the overall mission. So protecting water quality and restoring water to pristine conditions. So the specific policy context that we're operating under within water, some of you may be very familiar with this, but the EU currently operates under what we call the Water Framework Directive. And the goal here is to achieve good ecological water quality in all water bodies by 2027 and maintain water quality in existing high status areas. So they've kind of developed this, let's say, ranking system from bad to high. And the idea is that all the water bodies would fall into the categories of high or good. This requires member states to put in place what we call river basin management plans. These are 6-year plans specific to countries and kind of develop binding locally specific objectives. But at the same time, water quality is a huge challenge, and only 40% of the EU water bodies have reached good status. So you can see this is a challenge which is really quite hard to achieve. In terms of the situation in Ireland, we're not doing much better, but we're not doing much worse, I suppose, than the kind of overall EU development in water quality. What's interesting about Ireland is that the rural land use for agriculture is higher than the European average. So agriculture will have an impact on rural water quality. And we can see that there are high levels of nitrates and phosphates in rivers, and that we've also had an expansion in production over time with the objective of sustainable intensification. So hoping to improve production while reducing our negative impact on the environment. And what we can see over time in Ireland in terms of water quality is that the amount of kind of bad water quality, so that red block, you can see from the bottom to the top that is shrinking. But what's also happened is that we've lost some of these blue, so these high status water bodies, and the good as well. So we've reduced the bad, but we seem to be losing the good. And of course, relating it back to the targets under the Water Directive framework, we should be kind of 100% in the blue and the green. So you can see that this is a significant challenge. Again, it's not a uniform challenge, so you can see that kind of where the high and good water bodies are. This is not uniform across Ireland. There's definitely regional differences, but ultimately we're trying to get to all of these spaces being that blue or green and getting rid of the red, orange, and yellow. So we can see that we have a really clear mission or a goal within the Water Directive framework, and we've got a clear time frame as well. We're looking to do this by 2027, and so this is a really good example of a mission and the system that needs to kind of set up around this mission to try and solve the complex environmental challenge that is water quality. But we understand that water is what we call social technical. So it's not just about the water itself. It's really this interaction between both humans and kind of non-human actants, so the environment itself and the biophysical properties of water. And we really need to kind of change behavior across the system, and it's not just about changing farmer behavior. It's really setting up a system that's working towards change. And so that means that we need not just technologies and knowledge, but also we need kind of shifts in the institutional and social contexts that support and that these technologies are located within. So this is kind of just putting together why water is so complex and why it's also so interesting as a mission, and the kind of role of the environmental factors on the types of innovations that will work. When we talk about water quality and the impact on water quality, we're talking about the presence of agriculture or not. We're talking about the fact that farms aren't uniform. They can really vary in terms of the size, what they're farming, the access to knowledge and resource that farmers have, the norms kind of within farms and the beliefs, but also at a kind of national context as well. Then you throw in the local environmental characteristics. So what is the soil like? What does the landscape look like? The typography. And then you also add in kind of weather factors and rainfall, and of course time as well. So often the impacts that we see on water quality, they kind of happen over a long period of time, or there's this lag between what's potentially causing poor water quality and the effects of that over time. So you can see why we would categorize this as a really complex problem, because there's just so much going on in terms of trying to understand water quality and how to improve it. But also, even when we have kind of localized sources of pollution, we feel this across the water system, and we feel this not just in the agricultural sector, but across other sectors as well. So we can see, even when the problem is clear and we understand the problem, there's so many localized factors, both human and non-human, that will impact what type of solutions are available to us and what kind of works in the long run. So breaking it down a little bit and looking specifically at Ireland, when we talk about an innovation system, and specifically a mission-oriented innovation system, we're talking about that network of agents and actors and the set of institutions that contribute to both the development and the spreading or the diffusion of innovative solutions to reach a certain societal mission. So in this case, water quality. And within the innovation systems literature, I suppose, is kind of a handy breakdown of different categories of actors. So 4 main categories of actors would be influencing, research, enterprise, and intermediary. So influencing, we're really talking about the kind of policy and regulation space. For research, we're thinking both of public and private research institutions and other actors involved in research. Enterprise is kind of business, anyone who's involved within the value chain on the economic side. And then we have these kind of innovation bridging organizations that often move between these other actor categories and kind of help diffuse knowledge and innovation. And so within Ireland and within water quality, we have examples here of those actors. This is not the full list, but just to give an example of kind of who would fall under which category within the innovation systems literature. So to get to the kind of actual research project itself, what happened was in 2018, there was a workshop held at the University of Galway to really try and understand the system in place for water quality. There's quite a range of actors, kind of from the national department level, right through to the local authorities water program, LawPro, Teagasc as well, scientists, data analysts, community officers. Interestingly enough, for 2018, there was kind of a missing presence of farmers and I suppose community members as well themselves. This has changed over time in terms of their involvement, but within this workshop, some of the kind of big considerations that were identified by the stakeholders was firstly really recognizing this heterogeneity or the non-uniformness of the farm systems and how that relates to the risk of water quality, the need for localized information and advice in terms of water quality, and also the recognition of kind of this government industry partnership or public-private partnership, specifically through ACP or the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Program, which I'll talk a bit more about. So how do we kind of understand the system today? This is a bit of a complex diagram. I won't go too much into it, really just to kind of show that we've got these different levels of kind of policy or regulation on the left-hand side. So the Water Framework Directive has been translated into river basin management plans and then kind of specific actions underneath that. But in order to kind of reach those goals set out by the Water Framework Directive, we have an incredible amount of coordination between different bodies or institutions and actors and operating at different levels. So again, from that national level of Department of Housing and Department of Agriculture, right through down to farmers and local communities, and finding ways for those actors to really feed back kind of up the chain, so to speak. And so I suppose if we think about, well, really, what is kind of the innovation at work here? A big part of that is this kind of setting up a localized system, specifically through the ACP advisors and through LawPro, and that they kind of act as these bridging actors between farmers and local communities and other more nationally based organizations. This is a slightly different way of thinking about the system and who's involved in water quality. We did this together with the CAP network in Ireland. The process itself was really interesting. Originally, we actually had this diagram kind of flipped on its head because we thought, well, we start with the Water Framework Directive, and we kind of work our way down. But through the discussion, we really said, well, at the end of the day, kind of farmers and communities who are the most kind of impacted and have to kind of are often asked to make changes. And so really we want to talk about the system around them and how it is supporting them, or maybe in some cases not supporting them as well as it could. And so this is, again, just using kind of innovation systems language to think about who's involved in water quality, and kind of trying to find ways to map them out and map out their functions and where they sit within the system. So going back to the kind of key findings from the workshop, I suppose the workshop really, I think, pulled out kind of still relatively simplistic, but really helpful kind of understanding of the different farm systems within Ireland in relation to their water quality risk. So we have kind of intensive farms that are at high risk for having an impact on water quality. And then we have extensive farms that also are in high risk areas, or kind of in areas where they'll have an impact on water quality. And then we also have intensive farms that are in low risk areas, and extensive farms that are in low risk areas. So of course, every farm is different, but this is just one way in related to water quality, which we can think about how farming systems might be different. And it also shows that we're going to need to kind of have localized support, and how these localized factors, if we go back to that kind of complex formula for what impacts water quality, that's going to be at play in kind of each of these categories as well. And so one of the solutions here was to establish what we call priority areas for action. So those kind of intensive high risk areas where we can have the kind of most impact on improving water quality based on localized factors. I think another key thing that came out was that we need localized advice, but it really needs to be linked, or it needs to be running in tandem with both local and national research and evidence institutions. And so what we see is the establishment of the ACP program, so this advisory support program for farms, in conjunction with LawPro, and also working with the EPA. And I suppose a kind of big message that's come out of this is this idea of the right measure in the right place. So the right measure is the fact that ACP advisors have kind of 300 different measures that can be applied depending on the context or the farm system. And interestingly, around 5 out of those 300 are applied per farming system. So you can see that we have a kind of specific but also flexible kind of measurement system or measures that can be put in place. But then at the same time, we need to make sure that those measures are being done in the right place. And that's where kind of LawPro comes in to identify the specific areas, and works with ACP to kind of make sure that there's intervention in those areas, and also using technology from the EPA to kind of inform this as well. So I suppose the key takeaway is localized advice is really good and it's really important, but it's more powerful when it works in tandem with kind of local and national research and the broader system. The other big challenge coming out of that workshop and kind of the discussion since then is this idea of moving from being market-oriented to mission-oriented. So moving from being purely economically focused to also socially and environmentally is really challenging. And it's quite hard to kind of market water in relation to something like organics, for example, or in other contexts, kind of fair trade certification of goods. Water is a bit more challenging, and it's not so easy to certify in that way. And also we see that this public-private partnership with ACP in terms of funding and support from different spaces was really critical. So if you want to make change, you need to find these kind of shared interest points for the public and the private sector, and you need to have coordination between those sectors. And so I suppose one of the challenges that we're kind of still thinking through in different ways is really how do we reward economically water quality improvements given the complexity of this challenge. So I think for us as researchers, we really thought that what's happening in Ireland is an interesting case, and there might be a lot to learn from this. Firstly, I suppose this idea of mission-oriented innovation within the kind of academic literature, it's quite new. And so there's an opportunity to learn here about, well, when we're talking about complex social and environmental challenges, we need to really think about environmental challenges and how they can be kind of hyper-localized if you're starting to think about environmental systems, and that you need to factor this in when you design solutions. And I suppose what we see in the case of water quality is a huge kind of EU level directive and challenge that comes right down to, at the time, about 50 ACP advisors going farm to farm. So it's really quite an incredible scale, and it's quite incredible to think of the fact that kind of this farm level change contributes to what's a really complex sustainability challenge. So I suppose innovation systems and mapping out in this way and thinking through kind of water quality at systems level. Firstly, we can use it to kind of help track changes over time within, it's kind of what we did within Ireland with this project, but I suppose other countries as well. And then there's the question of thinking about how can we kind of compare the systems that have been set up between EU countries. So even though the EU countries all have the same target to hit at the end of the day, we're all under the Water Directive framework. There's going to be different strategies that are employed, and it's kind of interesting to look at these strategies next to each other and how the local context impacts the strategies that can be used. I suppose another thing for me as well is that often, I suppose intuitively, when we think of innovation, we think of this kind of really high tech. That's what we understand as innovation, but innovation is not always high tech, and some of the ACP measures are kind of relatively simple. They don't require kind of high levels of technology, but they can be really impactful. And so I think it's important for us to kind of shift our understanding of what counts as innovation or how we understand innovation. And this type of mapping can be really useful. And the other piece is that when we think about mission-oriented policy, it requires what we call reflexive governance. So we need to be flexible in how we design policy. We need to be flexible in how we respond, because a solution's not always going to work. We are going to get things wrong, and we need to be able to kind of move quickly and change. And at the same time, when we have an issue like water quality, we can see that the lagged impacts of water quality, that there is this delayed effect. So we might not always be able to make these kind of in-the-moment changes and see the results or understand the results until later on. I suppose an important part of the story is really this idea of feedback loops and what this looks like in practice. ACP has been an interesting example of a kind of bridging organization moving between farmers and other innovation stakeholders. And so that connection is really important. And also 2018, when this workshop was held, was the first time that many of these stakeholders were together in the same room. And so again, it just shows you that when you have a complex system and a lot of actors that are involved, bringing people together and coordinating in this way can be really challenging. And I suppose a key part of the story as well is the fact that ACP and LawPro has gone beyond just engaging with farmers and also involving the community and other local stakeholders. But I suppose the question is always, can we do more? And are the voices of farmers and local communities being heard, and is that being translated all the way up? It's difficult to do in practice, but I think that's something we can kind of think about and keep an eye on going forward. So lastly, I suppose just to wrap up on all of this, I think firstly, when you're talking about complex systems, drawing the boundaries and trying to understand what counts as a mission can be really challenging. You might have noticed from the earlier slides that we have this mission language kind of at the EU level. It's very high level. Even within Ireland, water quality within food vision is a goal within a mission. So I suppose in one way this language has been really helpful, but in other ways we're still trying to kind of tease out what counts as a mission, I suppose, or how we can map these systems and find these boundaries, and where we kind of draw the boundaries is challenging. And related to that, I suppose, is that the language of mission-oriented innovation and has caught on in policy, but I suppose we still have a long way to go in really kind of finding ways to assess these missions and to kind of do research around them. I suppose another thing is that different agricultural value chains, but also different countries and different stakeholder groups respond differently to different combinations of what we call carrots, sticks, and sermons. So incentives and kind of inspections and regulations, and then sermons in terms of, I suppose, sharing knowledge or kind of receiving advice. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then I suppose for me as a researcher, a big part of this piece of work was thinking about these spaces where there aren't these kind of clear missions. The Water Framework Directive gives us a very clear mission and what needs to be done. And there are other sustainability problems in other countries or in other spaces where there isn't this kind of clear policy or regulation directive, but there's still good work being done. So again, localization is kind of one of the key points, but also if we want to solve this challenge, we have to kind of scale it up. And ACP is a really great program. It's also resource intensive and time consuming, and we need to find ways to kind of scale it up, but keep it local somehow as well. And also just to say that there's still progress to be made. I suppose if you look at some of the kind of media coverage of water quality or in other spaces, you can see that we haven't gotten it right. We haven't solved the challenge. And in fact, we've seen kind of improvements in some areas and declines in other areas. This being said, that despite the general decline, we have seen improvements within the priority areas for actions. And so again, I think we have a kind of urgent mission. We're bound by these kind of time goals, but the impacts lag over time. And so I suppose we need to keep going with this, and we need to put more energy into this. And then finally, to kind of end off, as I suppose a new development has been the introduction of the Water European Innovation Partnership. I think we would argue that this is kind of a next step in a more coordinated and collaborative system that kind of aims to provide localized support. And I suppose what we're looking at here is how to kind of fund or provide payments for, excuse me, these high cost measures that have really high public goods benefits. So where measures are very expensive for farmers to put in place, but they have a huge impact on local water quality, we need to find ways to support that. And what we also see in the European Innovation Partnership is kind of a broader group of stakeholders and a more participatory approach to water quality. Again, another complex diagram, but just to show that we've really expanded in terms of who's involved in water quality and how different actors are connected, and that the European Innovation Partnership is a significant amount of money that's being put towards kind of localized projects for water quality, and that is a result of a lot of the kind of, I suppose, behind the scenes work that's been happening over time, to kind of bring actors together and to coordinate more significantly. So thank you very much. That's it from me. And also just to say that the Watermark report will be available soon. There's a summary of this research, but also other really interesting research on ACP, the ACP program, and other pieces of research as well. So look out for that, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Lori, thank you very much. Excellent explanation. I have to confess, when I was looking at your title of your presentation at the start and looking at some of your details, the terms used are not those that I would use on a daily basis in chatting, and I was kind of scratching my head a little bit. And you really have made things very clear, and actually you've made me realize that my day-to-day work is very much involved with systems thinking and participating in a lot of the groups pulling together the system for improving water quality. And the one key example that we had of that a little over a month ago, the European Commission visited Ireland to see what we're doing for water quality. And they know well what our water quality is. You gave the graphs there from the EPA, and they're seeing reports at least on an annual basis, and they know what our water quality was. But that visit from the European Commission was by and large showing the system that we're putting in place in Ireland to tackle water quality from an agricultural perspective. And I'm glad to say that they were impressed with the system, and they actually went on to say that what we're doing here could well be used as an example across other countries. So, so look, Laurie, thanks very much. I got an awful lot there from that. I want to apologize to our audience at the start. As I said, this is my first time hosting the Signpost webinar. I forgot to ask and and notify people that if you have questions, please use the Q&A function. Most people, I think, will know that already, and thank you very much for those that have already posted questions. And with that in mind, I'll hand over to Mary and Eoghan to relay some of the questions that are coming in.
Thanks, Ed. Question here, Laurie. Are community ENGOs, river trusts, etc., not missing from the active innovator list? And I think that one came in quite early, so it's possibly in reference to the 2018 list you showed.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. I suppose we've talked a bit about local communities, but there's actually more we can kind of tease out in that group as well. That's also not just a homogenous group. And I think they would also play a key role in this, especially as we move to more localized approaches.
Okay. And there's a question here. Does it really come down to just, you said 50 ACP advisors? What about all of the other actors and stakeholders in the food system? Do they not all have a role to play to deliver on the water quality improvement mission?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I suppose that's the point of a systems approach. I suppose for me, when I put that point in, I thought it was interesting to think about really kind of the scales that water quality crosses, that you're moving all the way from a kind of high level EU directive with specific targets, and you're coming all the way down to kind of, in Ireland, 50 advisors going around farm to farm. So I think it was more just to recognize that what's happening at the ground level is also part of the system, and that the system kind of is what we would call multi-scalar in terms of it's just the levels to the system are quite significant.
From your research, what comes across in terms of who or what is driving water quality improvement research here in Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I suppose the kind of EU regulation, the Water Framework Directive, that does seem to be kind of driving it. I suppose that's why we decided to take this kind of mission-oriented approach, is because it's so focused on policy. And I suppose that this policy is kind of that's kind of determining everything that comes from there. And I suppose the question would be, well, without this policy in place, would some of these things be happening? I would probably argue not. I suppose we don't know, but it does seem to be a kind of policy-driven process. But I think that's also shifted norms and values over time for everyone in the system.
Okay, and another one here.
Sorry, Mary, just before you come in there, just on a more technical thing, I'll just ask Laurie to stop sharing her screen.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, thanks very much. Sorry, Mary.
Sorry, Ed. Why do we need a mission and a systems approach? Do we not just have a target to achieve for water quality?
Yeah, I think this idea of missions really is focused on the complexity. I suppose a target could be a simple target, and maybe even looking at that kind of Water Framework Directive target, maybe it seems simple, of just get everyone to high status by 2027. It's quite clear, but I think missions, they, at least from the academic side, really understand the complexity of this, and we're thinking about the fact that you're going to need multiple solutions at once. You're going to need a lot of different actors involved, and so I suppose this idea of a mission goes beyond just targets to thinking about kind of the significant changes we need to make, both in terms of our institutions around our policy and our regulation, our law, but also our shifts in norms and values, and the fact that we're going to need kind of multiple innovation bundles or solution pathways to achieve this mission.
Okay, and I'll hand over to Eoghan after this one. Should Irish Water, Cuaja and other businesses, etc., be looking to set up an ACP type system to communicate and help alleviate the issues they are causing. So
Yeah.
Cuilcha would be forestry. Irish Water is the body that looks after water supply as such. And it's a comment, excellent presentation.
Thank you. That's a really interesting question. I suppose my answer would be yes. I'd be interested to hear it from the ASIP side as well. I suppose, in my opinion, there's room for everyone. And I think that is what's great about this kind of shift towards a localized approach is that, and the European Innovation Partnership is that this is something that we are interested in for water quality.
Okay, Eoghan.
Yeah, I'm just picking up a question here. There's one question in there. Did your research capture, I suppose, any frustrations from different organizations or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose one of the challenges I mentioned was this kind of I suppose the economic side, or I suppose cost is something that comes up quite a lot. And the cost of putting these measures in place. I don't know, Mary, you also, from the kind of wider project perspective, I think the biggest one we've talked about probably is the cost and the fact that it's can be kind of, even if it's not an economic cost, it's a kind of a knowledge cost, or it's a time cost in implementing some of these changes. But Mary, maybe you've seen other frustrations as well.
Well, sometimes I guess something that isn't that we pointed out in the project and that isn't acknowledged is that the cost can be different for different types of farmers for implementing the same measure. So very often there's an opportunity cost, and if a measure involves losing productivity or losing land, the cost to that for a more intensive farmer would be higher. I don't know if that answers, or I guess I should say that Lori isn't a scientist or a water quality expert. Neither am I, but yeah. I give another question and I kind of answer it a little bit in that there's a question here which is a little bit technical about ASIP as well. How much intervention or mitigation has been undertaken by ASIP to date, e.g. what actions have been implemented, what percentage of farms visited have been implemented? Is there information available to the public? And the reason I'm answering this myself is because we published a paper where we analysed, as part of the Watermark project, we analysed the uptake of ASIP measures. And there was there's another one here that's a kind of I think it's from the same person, has the voluntary nature of ASIP hindered mitigation actions? It seems, and this is a really important finding from the research around ASIP, it seems that it hasn't. The uptake of measures is very, very high. It's up in the 80s and 90s% across all the different mitigation actions. And as Lori said, the average is that ASIP advisors prescribe an average of 5 measures per farm for different kind of types of mitigation. So it's what we found in the research, and we had behavioral psychologists look at this as well, that for some measures that require farmers to believe that they have the capacity or the level of knowledge to undertake a measure, that the one-to-one approach from ASIP is really key in getting over across that kind of a barrier. And that also what's important about the level of uptake within ASIP is that the research also shows that in areas where there's a higher level of uptake of particular measures, then there's farmers in those areas are more likely to take on those measures as well, because I guess there's 2 important factors at play there. One is that they have the knowledge and they feel that they might have the capacity to do it if their neighbours are doing it, but also we're all behaviour creatures in that none of us like to be the first to do something, or very few of us anyway, and that, you know, when there's more of a social positive norm around doing something, when your neighbours think it's a good thing to do, you as a farmer are then more likely to do it. And I think in the longer term, what that whole relationship between LawPro and ASIP and the communities is that water quality is becoming a more important thing to all of us. and it's becoming a kind of a more positive thing to be aware of and to take measures against. Sorry, Owen, I spoke a lot there. Do you want to go with it?
Another question in there for you, Lori. I'll shorten it down. Has there been any kind of uptake or research done on what measures that other industries are implementing? So are some of the, so I suppose some of the big tech companies or some of the pharmaceuticals, are they putting in these constructive wetlands? Are they doing everything that we're promoting to farmers? I've done my best to shorten it down.
No, I think that's a really good question. Actually, we were talking before this presentation about, we were thinking of comparing kind of measures in Ireland to other strategies from other countries. But I suppose if we are really taking a systems approach, then this would be an interesting thing to think of, which I think I wouldn't say we have captured that in here. I don't know what Mary thinks, but I suppose we were kind of chiefly focused on ACIP, but of course that's not the only intervention.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. There's another question that kind of runs alongside that. Alongside actions like ACIP, should the question has just jumped on me. Sorry, alongside actions like ACIP, should the legislation, i.e. GAP, which would be good agriculture practice, so the farming regulations, be strengthened to better protect our waters from agricultural pressures? So I'm not asking you about GAP, but just kind of would say ACIP and regulation. How do they should they work together as part of the system, or is that the whole point of the system? Or
yeah, I would say so. I suppose there's a lot in that question, but again, I didn't really touch on it on this presentation, but I suppose it's in the paper as well, the fact that you do need to work kind of across disciplines and sectors, and that also includes policy as well. So obviously agriculture is a big part of water, but kind of trying to find some of these alignments within policy across different departments, it's quite difficult to do in practice. It's important, and then I suppose then there's a question of that link between policy and ACIP as well. I'm not sure if I'm answering that so well, but I suppose my initial answer would be yes.
yeah, and I guess the thing is that the system can only work if all the elements of the system are all moving in the same direction and at the same time, and that's kind of what's happening here in Ireland over the last 5 years.
But yeah, I suppose also just to add to that, I think often a big part of the innovation system is not just thinking about it from top down in terms of kind of also thinking about how we can create better feedback loops between, let's say, policy and the ACIP advisors or other stakeholders as well, which I think has been part of the important part of the story too, is that it can't just be one directional, if you know what I mean, of kind of, here's a policy, now go and do it. But is it, you would want to see kind of again that reflexive governance of, is this working, what's the feedback on this, which again, it can be difficult to do in practice, but that's kind of what we would want to see going forward.
Okay.
Sorry, Laurie, I'm going to just come in on top of that. There's two questions that came in. I'm going to kind of bind them together. One is saying that the nitrates action program has really, through the derogation, grabbed the attention of intensive dairy farming, and what about other agricultural stakeholders? Yeah. And in conjunction with that, there was a question to do with the research that Mary spoke about, and has this identified the different farming sectors that the ACIP advisors have called on and had most engagement with? I think they're kind of tie in with the discussion on that. Have you any comment on that, on other sectors that are not being as directly impacted by the regulation, and as a consequence, either their industry, like Dairy Industry Ireland, are putting significant funding into ACIP, which we may not see from other sectors not being directly impacted by the regulation, understandably. Is there any idea of the different levels of engagement from different sectors?
I'll take that one, Laurie, because I don't know if you're familiar with it. The highest level of engagement, Eddie, is with the dairy farmers, and that's largely because there are more dairy ASIP advisors funded by Dairy Industries Ireland. And then there are funded by within the Teagasc cohort, there's slightly more. So the Teagasc cohort then focus mostly on the livestock, the dry stock, the beef and the sheep sectors, and tillage as well. So the level of engagement and what we call engagement is that farmers have either started, are undertaking, or have completed measures. The highest level of engagement is from the dairy sector. It's like close to 90%, but we'll say the engagement from the other sectors is close on 80% across the board. So the level of engagement is very high, and I think that was the question that was asked before, was the voluntary nature detrimental? But I think it's because of the one-to-one engagement with the ASIP advisor, who explained the problem to the farmer, explain how they may be contributing on their farm and how they can mitigate the particular issues on their farms. I just follow with another one here. There's an interesting one. It's more of a comment, I think, than a question. Is there scope for this series? I presume it means Signpost or ASIP to roll out a drain maintenance guidance talk to help farmers and contractors to be aware of the issues surrounding excessive cleaning of farm drains, and also the potential positive opportunities for building silt traps, ponds and wetlands. And I think that's more one for that we can pass on to our because Karen Daly and Owen Fenton in Johnstown have done some work on this as part of the Watermark project as well, where they looked at the risks of posed by different types of drains in terms of their connectivity to water or to farmyards. And Owen also did work on that Roadrunner project about water runoff on farm roads and stuff. So I think this is one that it's a useful comment, and we can pass it on to ASIP and the researchers.
And believe it or not, it's 28 minutes past 10, and I know, Mary, you're have other things to go to pretty immediately, so it's getting around to time to wrap things up. I'd like to say thanks very much, Mary and Owen, for making my job very easy. Before we finish with the questions for Lori, I'm going to just maybe on a wider perspective, I'm wondering, how does our system compare with that in other countries? Like I mentioned that the Commission were very impressed in comparison with other European countries. You have a lot of experience with Uganda, a part of the world I have never been to and know nothing about. And I'm wondering, how do things compare, just as a final wrap up, how do things compare with our systems for tackling water quality, or maybe food production on a bigger scale in general, with other countries?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of parts to that question. From doing this piece of research and putting this presentation together, I suppose we're thinking more about what would it look like to kind of, I suppose, compare EU countries against each other who all fall under the same directive, the Water Framework Directive. And that's, I suppose, a next piece of research for us. I suppose in terms of my own experience of within the PhD going between Ireland and Uganda, I don't think water quality is a top priority for a country like Uganda. I suppose even at EU, we kind of focused on things like greenhouse gases and water quality. I would say, from my perspective, is a relatively newer challenge that's kind of coming to the forefront now really strongly in policy. So in terms of Uganda, the kind of there is a strong drive for, at least at the farm level, of more sustainable practices, but it's around other sustainability challenges. And I suppose the other thing is that the water quality example is really, there's quite a heavy involvement of policy and legislation, and in Uganda, I would say, for example, we don't see there isn't something like the Water Framework Directive kind of guiding a specific sustainability challenge. There are other policies, but they're not as, let's say, tailored to a specific challenge. So those, I suppose, at a high level, that's some of the differences that I see. I suppose also farmers in Ireland have more in common with farmers in Uganda than you might think. I suppose from coffee in East Africa to dairy in Ireland, everyone's talking about things like farm succession and these kinds of topics. It's at a different scale, but yeah, there are some surprising similarities, I would say.
Yeah. I think that's very good to hear, and yeah, and it's important to put things into context, I suppose, where we are, and that we're not alone, and places that we may think are a million miles away, both geographically and culturally, could be a lot closer than we realize. Lori, thank you very much for making what I was apprehensive of being a very complex topic very easy to understand, and you really gave me a very good appreciation of where I fit into the whole system and to the system as a whole. And I wish you the best of luck with your research going forward. Thanks very much. And thanks again to Mary and Eoghan, but more importantly, thanks very much every week to Eoghan Marr, who puts the whole thing together. We wouldn't be here today without her, and she makes all our lives a lot easier. While we don't see her on the front, she makes this whole thing happen. Thanks very much, Eoghan. Next week, we have Dr. Kate McAney, who will be given a talk on horseshoe bats and their habitats and linking between their habitats. So same time, same place, this time next week, we will be hearing about the horseshoe bat. So to all of you who have attended, thanks very much for coming along, and have a good weekend.